Tēnā koutou katoa. All the stayers here in the audience, great to see you. Welcome back for this panel discussion. We've got the future beyond data sovereignty, and it's my pleasure to be facilitator of this panel with such a bunch of distinguished panelists. Ko waio, ko Daniel Wilson tuaku ingoa, Hiuri tēnei no Ngāpui me Ngāti Pikiao. I'm part of the Tikanga Technology program. And I'm just going to introduce you to our panelists who are here in the seats, but also beaming in from New York City. We've got Hautahi Kingi, who's on the screen. Oh, he's on the screen that I can see. Oh, there he is. Hiding away there. Hautahi is an economist and data scientist, currently working for Google, and is based in New York City. It's after midnight where he is.
Thank you, bro.
And we've got Kaye-Maree Dunn from Making Everything Achievable, and also tech co-founder of Aho, which is a whānau database. We've got Peter Lucas Jones, CEO of Te Heku Media, who was last year recognised by Time magazine as being one of the 100 most influential people in AI for leading the Papareo project. We've got Andrew Sporle. He's Managing Director of Insight Analytics and one of the founding members of Te Mana Raraunga. He wears quite a number of Hautahi. He's also part of the Horizon Europe Fund, national contact point for this multi-billion-dollar research fund. And then on the end here we have the Honourable Nanaia Mahuta, who needs no introduction, with Te Kotahi Research Institute at the moment, but also extensive political career, including foreign affairs and trade. It's awesome. Okay, so to begin, we'll just run through and if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, and then I've got a question that you can fill in. So we're coming up to 10 years of advocating for Māori data sovereignty. Te Mana Raraunga have a definition of Māori data sovereignty as referring to the inherent rights and interests that Māori have in relation to the collection, ownership and application of Māori data. And there's still mahi to be done in this space. Soon we'll be on this panel looking at moving beyond data sovereignty, what else we need to do. But I just want to start by asking how Māori data sovereignty relates to your mahi, and perhaps perspective on what the value of Māori data sovereignty is to you. Jen, should we start?
The one that's not in data. Ka tira tātou e mihi ana ki a tātou katoa I haramai nei ki te tautoko a tēnei kaupapa. Nō reira, e haere tonu ana ngā whakaro nui ki ngā peka katoa tō tātou nei motu, me o koutou nei whakaro. Pai te haramai ki te tautoko tēnei. They've thrown the question to the person that's not really intimately involved in data or technology, but from a user's point of view. And it was really interesting to hear this morning's conversation around the work that's being done. So I want to put that mihi back to you all who are working in the data, AI and tech space. I think in terms of Māori development, growth and opportunity, beyond data sovereignty is a infinite series of potential opportunities if we go down the route that we think we're going down. And I'll say this in the presentation this morning. One of the ideas that was promoted is that we need to use our own references when we think about data. And if data is a taonga, what does that open up? It opens up a world of possibilities. Innovation, the ability to be able to use that for all types of good, because what sits behind valuing data as a taonga are a range of values that are from our Māori knowledge base, that are add to, not take away from. So in my mind, data sovereignty, while we're talking about it now as perhaps a thing to do, in an applied sense for community wellbeing and oranga, we can then make better decisions about what wellness looks like. We can inform our investment and growth trajectory in ways that add to the things that we value, our taiao, our sense of connection, planet peace and prosperity, if you want to globalise it. So there is an infinite set of possibilities beyond data sovereignty as we move, and I think confidently, into this space. The challenge we have, and again, I'm an applied user of data. I sit on a commercial iwi entity as well as a social entity for two different iwi with very different starting points in terms of where they are mapping out their aspiration. But one thing that I have observed is everyone is talking about understanding and having a greater sense of care and responsibility for data and knowledge of their own people. And why that matters is because as they make decisions about investing in their people and their capacity in place and their taiao, kaitiakitanga objectives, data is key. The challenge is that the amount of replication that must take place, because you're talking about big and small entities, same challenge. How do they do this successfully without feeling like they're having to replicate the wheel? So I'm coming here kind of more in a seeker of understanding what's happening in this space so that I can perhaps in some small way try to tui the practical challenges that exist out amongst our whānau, our hapua and our marae, and with our iwi as they continue to grow and develop for the future. So I'm excited about the conversations that are happening. I'm excited about the potentiality of how Māori are participating in both the tech, the AI, and the data space. I do believe, and this may be my Y262 kind of shaping of how I entered into that space, was that we can't utilise our knowledge unless we've got really strong protection regimes, and that's probably the thing that we've spent quite a bit of time on, but we might be just reaching the cusp of being able to give ourselves permission to venture forth into this world of knowledge and in ways that we are the architects of how we better utilise data, tech and AI going forward. The last thing I say is that if we're not I guess, ambitious enough about this, we will be eclipsed by what's happening around the world, and the world is seeking out Indigenous knowledge because they are looking for new solutions to old problems, and the divergent way of thinking that exists within Indigenous peoples is, I think, something to be caring for and looking after, hence the need to discuss how do we protect this knowledge, whether it be in the form of data or knowledge, in order to better utilise it, to add to, not take away from. So you're asking the non-techie person there. That's my answer. I don't know if it lands very well, but there you go.
Raraunga te rama, kia ora huhi mai koutou, ko ere sport toko ingoa, he uri hau Ngāti Apa, rangatane me te rarua hau, kia ora e te whanau ganei. I'm a sociologist. I'm actually a fluffy sociologist, trained in qualitative sociology, somehow ended up as a social epidemiologist. And I have pulled my research out of Auckland University and set up Indigenous and a company called Insight Analytics Limited. We do three things, right? First of all, we're really focused on building capability and capacity. It's my honour and privilege to host a number of emerging, really, really talented young people. I'm feeling old, but everybody's young. And we offer an environment where people can do different, be Māori, explore things, and work in a Māori and Tikanga-informed environment, affiliated with, but not part of the university. We're also building capability in terms of methods for using and getting use out of data. Because data sovereignty is all very well, but data only has value if you use it, right? And one of the issues with using it, and especially in this country, is there are massive technical barriers and cost barriers associated with getting value out of data. So we're busy producing solutions for how to reuse data, how to visualize data, all based on open source tools that will be freely available. The second thing, work stream that we have is working with the integrated data infrastructure. And their data sovereignty is really important because that is a collection of linkable government data sets that are available for research purposes, and that you're not allowed to identify individuals, but you can identify collectives. But it's all data that has been collected without consent and linked without consent. So I would argue that, and lots of others have argued before me, that creates greater impetus for doing things based on values in tikanga and making those explicit, right? Because if there is no consent, where does the value system come in? And we've currently got a government that is much more inclined to use those resources for looking at potential solutions. And there's two problems with that. Well, there's actually a lot of problems, but there's two big problems with that. One of which is they're now contractually obligating our service providers to put their data into the integrated data infrastructure, over which the only person that has control over that is the government statistician, right? That will now include the new whānau water contracts. Be afraid. You should be. Secondly, it is very hard for us to use that data source to tell our own stories, right? Government now has a lot of information. We all hear about Facebook's got lots of information about us, and yes, but we've given that to them, rightly or wrongly. Government now has the integrated data infrastructure where they are routinely doing intergenerational linkage of our data to fill in gaps. So if you're using Census 23 data, they have filled in gaps in there, looking at electoral rolls and linking intergenerationally what you've said, what your parents have said, and what your grandparents have said about you. Routinely. Didn't ask anybody. The third thing we do as a company is in the governance role. When you get old and a little bit boring, you tend to sit on a lot of committees, right? And I seem to have hit that level. But a lot of those committees are talking about what we do about the governance of data. So I sit on the Data Ethics Advisory Group for the government statistician with, I always get the NIAG. It's, Robin, can you tell us what NIAG stands for, please? Yeah, and Robin said, Robin and Rosie are on it, and Robin helped establish it. So, but also a couple of international bodies, including the Independent Program for the Information Environment, which is funded by big corporate business that are data users. And they're really interested in the issues of data sovereignty because it's values-driven, right? And if you're working in an environment where there's lots of data that have been, and you're not sure where it's come from, it's good to know what data you can trust. And if you find a data set where the values about how it's collected, how it's stored, and how it's used are values-driven, then you know where you stand. And these big companies want to know where they stand in the age of fake data. So that's the areas I work in. And although I think this panel is about beyond data sovereignty, it's beyond, but we're still standing on it. Right? That's our foundation, right? So, and I think we can't let go of what we've already achieved. We just need to build on it.
Kia ora tātou, whenua e mihi ana hau ki te whare. Ki te iwi nōna I nei whenua e tūnei tēnei whare. Ko Peter Lucas Jones tōku ingoa no te aupauri a hau, ka mutu e hari ana hau te haere mai ki konei I tēnei ahi pō, ki te tuku I oku nei whakaro. Mo ngā mahi e hāpaingi ana e tēnā o tātou. Mo te mana Raraunga o tātou te iwi Māori te take. I would like to start by saying that every time we participate in ensuring the survival of an Indigenous language, we are participating in a journey to save this planet. When we realize that Indigenous languages, pēnei te reo Māori, is the home of traditional knowledge and the key to unlocking the understanding of our very unique philosophical worldview. We understand that language, that data, is not just an intangible asset. It is more than the conversations around intellectual property. When we broaden our understanding that te reo is the home of our culture and is the unique connection point for us with our sister languages in the Pacific, we are understanding that there is a future beyond teaching computers how to speak Māori. I work in Kaitaia, and I would like to pay respect to the Iwi Radio Network efforts that have for 30 years been a monument to the critical Māori rights movement that saw the recognition of not just our language and culture, but the use of frequencies to promote that language and culture, and to gather corpus, to gather data, to tag and label that data from our haukainga about every maunga, about every rākau, about every awa, about every moana, and anything and everything that our whānau hapu and iwi, especially our kaumātua, wanted to express to us, with us, in native language. And that has been the cornerstone of Te Hiku Media, achieving a 92% accuracy rate when it comes to our speech-to-text technology that we created from the ground up, outperforming any attempt by any international corporation that has assumed that they could do better than the haukainga. Because I tell you something for free, nobody knows our language and our culture like we do, especially ngā mea I tupu ake I roto I te rāreo. Te nuinga o te wā kua tukua e nei mahi mā ngā whare wānanga e hāpai. Engari kaurawa tātou e wareware. Kei te haukainga, tēnei mea e kōrero hia ana ko te mātauranga Māori. Me pēhea rā hoki te whakatinana I taua mea. And that is why I, along with our team, were recognized in the Time magazine's list for artificial intelligence top 100. And I have to say that we did that because it was a community effort. It was a community effort of speakers. I didn't do that alone. In fact, it was everybody in our whānau, everybody in our hapu, everybody in our iwi and the iwi that participated in that journey with us. Now, I talk about this because our story is a story that reflects the importance of data sovereignty. When we hear our whānau talk about data sovereignty today and we think beyond that, that's where our mind has been, beyond that. And the realization that language are the keys to the kainga. And those aspects of language that we understand to be grammatical, accent, dialectal, words of preference, colloquialisms, idiomatic expressions, they are the home of our philosophical worldview. When we think about data governance, When we think about the 1 billion people that have access to compute, open source data, and algorithms, we are drawn to the fact that there is not a digital divide only. There is now a divide of dignity, because it's about access based on finances. And I'm not talking about dignity like mana, I'm talking about dignity like money. And that's becoming the new mana is the money. So when we think about that and we recognize that 5 billion people have access to the internet, how many nearly 3 or 4 billion that don't? The 5 billion that do are spending about 6 hours a day online on average. When we think about that, what do we consider important in terms of safety, accountability, and responsibility? Koia ine ko ngā mea e whakaro ana hau te safety, te accountability, me tēnei mea e kōrero he ana ko te responsibility. And when we think about those things, if we were to translate that whakaro into the work of other artificial intelligence advancements, for example, health AI. I'm talking about language. That's what I do. I do the reo. But if we were to think about health and how artificial intelligence is used in health, in Kaitaia we have 2,000 people that can't get a doctor in Nanaia. And when we think about that, you know, Andrew, that's 2,000 people that don't get primary health service. They're lucky to get secondary. And who do you think's going to get a doctor? And who do you think's going to get an AI? And what's better, the human doctor or the AI? Well, what we know about the AI is it is moved by data that largely does not come from our community. So if data is biased, rubbish in, rubbish out. That's what I want to talk about. Kia ora mai anō tātou.
Kia ora tātou. Kanui ngā mihi kia koutou. Taku pāpai he uri no Pangaru, no Ngāti Manawa ki te Raraunga, tētahi atu taha no Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa. Tōku karani pāpā he uri no Ngāpuhi, ki Waiwhatawhata. Tōku māma no Konei, no Ngāti Mahanga ki Whatawhata. Tōku karaua no Ngai Tāmanuhiri no Ngāti Kahunu. Kia ora tātou. I've got a bit of a different layer to all of this. I'm a hautatu, you see. I'm a non-technician at all, but I do watch and I observe, and I just want to mihi to my bro here, Peter Lucas, on his approach in not only designing and co-creating a platform for the protection of te reo rangatira in collaboration and in partnership with his whānau and his people. I also want to mihi to our academics and also to the team from Tikanga and Technology, because as a hautatu who is curious around how far might we influence technology to better serve our needs as whānau, what are the guidelines to help us to do that? And when Te Mana Raraunga had first established, I was very interested in their statements that they made around the protection of what is Māori data sovereignty and what does that mean. Tikanga and Technology had only just started, so there were a whole range of experiments that were exploring what does that really look like, working with different matanga, pakeke kaumātua, to explore te ao Māori values, and then how do you translate that into te ao matihiko. And in amongst all of that, here we are as entrepreneurs trying to find the best way forward and try and find some examples. And there weren't really that many, to be honest. And earlier today, it was made mention of the work of Te Heku and their kaitiaki licence, which in itself is a significant document to help us think about and consider not only the use of mātauranga Māori, but the way that we go about asking for consent and approval, and also what will you do with the data to ensure that you will do no harm. And so I've appreciated that things have grown and developed. I'm gutted that I missed the traditional knowledge labels kōrero today. But I also want to acknowledge that work because those of you that are librarians, nerdy museum people, I love you, our kahui kaitiaki whānau, who are really in the archives or in the deep of the museums, you know, their minds and their brains are supercomputers. And when they are working with our taonga and exploring how do we safely share this taonga, this knowledge and information to our people and communities, but also how do we safeguard some of this information so that it's not scraped, misused, abused, or more importantly, where other people are profiteering off our mātauranga and none of that comes back to our own whānau and our own people. So if I think about data sovereignty tomorrow, there's a part of me which says the horse is bolted. And I say that because we already have large corporate entities and leaders who have now put themselves into very influential positions to not only push their own approach to data acquisition, and now it's forced data acquisition. If you have an app or you use Microsoft, anything, it's basically, when you use it, that's your consent. And so everything that we're doing is being scraped at the moment, unless we're finding alternatives, as we're seeing people are jumping off Meta, moving on to Red Note, jumping into Blue Sky, primarily because we're nervous about how these leaders with great influence, I'll name no names, will use that information and that power for their own benefit. So that's just, has the horse bolted? I think one great thing about having Indigenous data sovereignty conversations and statements, it means that at least we're making an effort to safeguard who we are, how we operate, how our knowledge is in the world and how you access it. But does that mean that the AI will respect that? And does it mean that those that are in influence will respect that also? I'm not sure. The third part that I'm nervous about in regards to beyond data sovereignty is, and comes back to perhaps the horse is bolted, is the use of technology in warfare. And we've all seen and been privy to a broad range of warfare tactics that we may never have been able to see 10, 15 years ago. You know, like we've literally had a doorway, a consistent doorway into behaviours and activities. But alongside that, there's also been a great deal of experimentation during those times. And I'm being vague on purpose. I'm being vague on purpose because I'm just trying to plant some ideas and some seeds, which is that there are already massive machinations in place currently, which is not only about scraping our data and our information, it's also about location data. Imagine if, as Indigenous activists, one day we say something that somebody in power doesn't like. They have the ability to switch off my power, switch off my internet, organise a tax audit. Deep fakes have the ability to put my face on something and somebody involved in something terrible just because I could be deemed an enemy of the state. That's far too much power for one or two people to be wielding. Now imagine that at a country level, imagine that at a broader geopolitical level, and so then what do we as tangata whenua, iwi take have to protect ourselves from these kinds of nefarious actors and players that do not have our whānau hapu iwi and our mātauranga front and centre when they make their decisions. I guess my final point around that is it's far too easy, and we saw it when some decisions were made from across the Atlantic Ocean around the bombing of Hiroshima, that people were able to make a decision collectively on the other side of the world to enact damage on people in a completely different country. So I might argue that there was a need for that, but what does that look like in 2025 and beyond? We've only just seen a little snippet of it. And what is it going to look like in the future? And are we not nervous, but we may need to start to be very mindful about the information that we're sharing, our photographs, the way that we conduct ourselves online, and also the platforms that we're participating in, because we're willfully giving away our information with every keystroke. So how do you have those conversations with your whānau, with your tamariki, with your grandparents, with your aunties, uncles, cousins around cybersecurity and safety? What does that look like within your whānau? And so for me, the beyond Māori data sovereignty conversation is how do we implement systems, methods, approaches and governance to protect our whānau, our whenua and our whakapapa. Koera.
Kia ora.
Tēnā koutou. He uri o ngā rauru me te ati haunui a Pāparangi ahau. I tipu ana au ki Whanganui, ki runga I tōku marae ko Pakaraka. Aroha mai for not being able to be with you in person today, but very much looking forward to this kōrero. I'm a data scientist at Google. I work on the YouTube recommender systems mostly, and specifically in the responsibility arm. So I work on email fairness and algorithmic bias, bridging algorithms to counter misinformation, and the protection of children. And I guess from the experience I can say one thing, which is that using and building and monitoring AI tools in a responsible way is hard. It's really hard. The models are big, complicated, the data's huge, there are so many users, and some of those users that are not nice people. And so Māori data sovereignty to me is just a kind of an ongoing process of vigilance, really. And so I actually don't work directly with Māori data in my main role here, although much of what I do work on, particularly in email fairness and algorithmic bias, would, if applied in Aotearoa, be directly relevant. So algorithmic bias just asks a question, whether a model discriminates against certain groups. And what that generally means is, does it make more mistakes on certain groups than it does overall? So on YouTube, for example, that might mean, are we mistakenly taking down videos that shouldn't be taken down? And are we doing that at a higher rate on certain creator groups, say, than others? But this is a very general concept. So I think it really originated in the criminology literature. So there were these automated tools that courts were using in the US, and they were wrongly denying bail more often to black defendants than white defendants. And I think, Andrew, you've done some work on this area. I think you had a paper there on governance and sovereignty of algorithms. So just kind of thinking beyond data sovereignty, for me, I think this has actually been touched on already, but I think it's helpful to think of the 3 pillars that you mentioned, Daniel: the collection, the ownership, and the application of Māori data. I think a lot of focus, and rightly so, has been on the first 2, at least in the early years of this idea. So who should be collected and how, who should own the data, how can responsible use be ensured? But I think there's actually a slight tension when the 3rd pillar comes up, because I think there's a conflict, a trade-off between the kind of a kaitiaki role of an organisation and its role as an advocate, or as its responsibility to use that data in a way that most benefits, the iwi or whatever rōku data they're in charge of. And so I think in terms of beyond, or what lies in the future for Māori sovereignty, I think it's in identifying opportunities where Māori data may be of use and probably making some hard decisions about potential trade-offs. So Peter Lucas, I read your piece on the OpenAI Whisper model. I think you might have been referring to that earlier. And I think you actually raised the dilemma yourself a little bit. So you tweaked it with your own data and you made it better. But then I think you kind of raised that kind of tension of, on the one hand, we want to rightly criticise and be wary of these organisations that go against our kaupapa, that are so cavalier as to effectively be stealing data. But on the other hand, if these tools are inevitably put to wide use by our people, then what does that mean for our responsibility to engage with these organisations that we
And
may
also
not like?
because retraining a model with your own data is very expensive. So we can't run away from the divide of dignity that comes with the age of intelligence, because retraining costs money. And which Indigenous groups have the finances or backing to do exactly that?
Aye. Exactly. And yeah, there's a mai whakaaro.
Wow, that's already been quite expansive thinking. Awesome. Now, everybody here has been involved in kaupapa, or currently involved, that has a global view, or access to a position where you're thinking about what the global impacts are. So what is the potential global offering that Māori have? And we've already sort of touched on what potential threats there are in engaging globally. I'll be interested in hearing.
Well, I'll start with this. I mean, it's my view that what Māori have is a values base embedded in our knowledge system that informs our critical conscience, because data, technology, AI, they're a tool. But really, it's what informs the utilisation of the tool for good. It's your critical conscience. So if we don't believe that, then we're doing ourselves a disservice. But I think we do believe it, which is why we need to engage. I mean, I think to Hautahi's point about the algorithms, surely there must be some work being done out there around Indigenous algorithms that might start to populate certain spaces in ways where you're not being eclipsed by the great majority of other algorithms, because that values base is so deeply entrenched and informs in a way that leads to a different series of outcomes. And if I just use a simple kind of logic, that adds to environmental benefits, people benefits, different types of measures and things like that. And it really speaks, I think, both to the points you raise, Hautahi, and yourself, Peter Lucas, and Kaye-Maree, around if we need to be doing this differently. Autonomous weapons, informed under the current logic of the north-south kind of mindset, takes us to a very challenging place. But autonomous weapons of peace look very different if we start to think about how do you counter that? Mm-hmm. The high potential of who's generating these weapons, and how do we, as Indigenous people, say, well, actually, if that's the direction of travel, we're in a different game here. It's the preservation of peace, and what are we creating to counter some of that? Now, the hard thing for us is scale, money, maybe even having decision makers in places that actually believe our remit around peace above all else But the point of it all is I think we can outthink, because of values, the way in which this world is currently going. And I think Indigenous people kind of sense that, which is why we're trying to have all these diverse collaborations on a number of levels that take us to this common ground of saying there's something there in how we think, what we're doing, how we're building the future in a way that doesn't hurt the planet, hurt the outcomes that we're all seeking. So, you know, it's a challenge, I don't doubt it, but I think the critical conscience element of the Indigenous mindset is what's required for this time.
I would add that if we're to think about the 1 billion people that have access to compute the relevant data and algorithms, and you think about the 9 billion people that don't, if we're thinking globally and we think about that row sitting in front of us, that's 1 to advance and 9 to be left behind. The work that I do is about making sure that our people aren't left behind. Because i ngā whakaro tātou mo te mana Raraunga, e hara no te tangata anahe, no tōna whānau, no tōna hapū, no tōna iwi, ka mahara hoki tātou, kei kona anō tētahi mea I kōrerohia e ngā mātua. Kaua e ware ki te aroha, ki te tangata. And when we think about that, in a very simple way, I think we're reminded too about the jobs of the future. Because beyond data sovereignty are the jobs of the future. And when we think about that, we're talking about upskilling and reskilling. What sort of people are employed today in all these relevant work streams? They are not always the people that have travelled the learning journey that equals a degree, a master's degree, a PhD, or a postdoctorate. They are people that have the ability to learn. So when I think about beyond data sovereignty, I'm remembering our future and leave nobody behind. And who gets left behind in the history of Aotearoa? Who gets left behind in the history of the world? We know that. And the reality is, history has a way of repeating itself. Now, if we are feeding our models and training them on rubbish data, what on earth do we expect them to offer us when we use those systems? That is why we've spent time labeling and tagging our data, because we do not have a large language model, we have a small language model, but it is a model that can scale into the Pacific, offering support to our sister languages. What we've achieved, they can piggyback on. We will start to embark on working with our sister languages and starting to think about how we can offer what we've done as something that they can fine-tune. And I think Hautapu made a really important point. Fine-tuning. Tuning something on other data, piggybacking on something that is related. And that, I think, is something that we cannot offer to, not only offer to our sister languages in the Pacific, but our sister cultures, Indigenous cultures, throughout the world. Policy is so hard to first of all decide, and then it takes forever to implement. You know, and meanwhile, industry has moved on. We're making stuff. We're not writing about it. We're making it. And when we're making stuff, who's responsible for that development? The user? Now, I like the health example because who's responsible for it? The doctor? Now, we know real human doctors, they do that oath. I'm not going to hurt anybody. I'm not going to do any harm. Now, if we were to look at that and we go into te tairāwhiti or te hiku o te ika, and we know that we can't go and see a doctor, so we're going to get the AI. If that AI makes a mistake, which it will, who is responsible for the AI mistake? That actually is a life and death situation. Is it the person that decided to use the AI to support the efficiency of the work they have to do? Is it that doctor? Is it the hospital? Or does the government have to have a look at themselves and go, well, actually, our soft touch approach to regulations actually wasn't good enough? So I ask that question because that example can be translated into the education system as well. And let's not romanticize this idea that AI is going to bridge the education gap, because who do you think is going to get a real human teacher, Daniel? And who's going to get the AI one? Tēnā taku kōrero.
Kia ora. I think that the value proposition, and there's multiple, right? Say all Māori are like this, and that's what makes us more awesome in the world. We've got an extraordinary talent at collaboration. And I think that as fellow Hautatus in the room, when you can see an opportunity, you're going to drive for it, right? You're going to go, hey, look, you've got these skills, you've got these gifts. How can I match what we have in our kāinga, or in my skill set, my kete, and work with yours? And fortunately or unfortunately, capital was one of the biggest barriers that we face. We've got all the ideas. I think if you left it to this panel of Māori to figure out world peace and everything else, we'd get it sussed by tomorrow. If we had the resource and the influence to be able to implement the changes. And I think that's really important. It shouldn't be the barrier, though, that's preventing our development. I think the other thing that connects us, particularly to other Indigenous peoples, and I'm not kind of leaning into the trauma story, but we do have a shared historical trauma amongst us. And many have already survived and come out the other side of a genocide. We've already been part of the removal of our language intentionally by governments. We've survived our children being removed from their homes and placed into either state institutions or with white families. So the levels of trauma that we've been able to survive to get us to 2025 is considerable. So that gives us this awareness of how to survive despite overwhelming odds, and how some of us might have to go undercover to get things done, or we've also learnt some really terrible behaviours, like lateral violence, and kind of ego challenges and poor governance, which, you know, I'm not saying anything to anyone that you haven't experienced before. And so we've got these really interesting challenges which we've got to traverse. And, you know, I like this idea of ancestral intelligence, because it's that ancestral intelligence, it's the relational work, it's the commitment and love, deep love for our people, a deep love for our language, our history, our traditions, our medicines. That is actually a significant X factor, because you're aware that if I'm going to be walking on somebody else's land, you know, I'm walking into their history, their story, their survival story, their joy. And so, what kind of technologies might we build as a result of all of that lived experience? What are the cool ideas and inventiveness and innovation that might emerge as a result of that? And I'd say there's three things that we're still bumping into. One is, unfortunately, our tribal structures are still just struggling with the day-to-day business, the day-to-day state of affairs of managing what they have to, current plate. If you were to take a tribal chief executive and look at another organisation, say a social services organisation or a general company, the levels of responsibilities that the Māori CEO or chair has to carry versus their non-Māori counterpart is significant, right? All the cultural load, the emotional load, the whānau load, te mea. So how can you think or imagine or be playful or inventive if you don't even have the brain space to think? So that's a reality that many, not all, but many of our tribal leadership are grappling with. So to then even have space to consider a data sovereignty strategy or a technology strategy, like it's way out the door. You've got to line up below our housing needs, our food sovereignty requirements, our treaty settlement process, our interaction with local and central government. You know, like this all kind of falls in the I wish I could have. It's not even in a nice to have, it's in a maybe in the next 10 to 15 years when I can get to it. Then maybe we might be able to sit down and have a conversation. So, we've got far too much on our plate, potentially, and we're not investing directly into our innovators. And we're still reliant on the Crown for pūtea. I haven't yet come across, we've got, we do have Tuatea, the Māori Spectrum Trust, who has the new funds for kahau. But potentially that's the only entity, other than research funds, that is proactively going to be investing in innovation, technology development. And that's really worrisome, because if we're not investing in our own people to create, if we're not supporting our makers, if we don't have quality governance and consideration around how we participate in this world, then we're not even on the page. And how do you get on the page? They'll go, oh, our rangatahi. Our rangatahi are the future, they'll tell us what to do. But you'll find that actually they're probably in the same situation of grappling with real life. So I'd really like to see us as Māori carve out space for this. And in all honesty, I really see a future where we're doing joint ventures with our other First Nations whānau. They got the capital, we got the skills. It's a great marriage. Yes.
Hautahi, you got a contribution?
Yeah, well, maybe I have a slightly more optimistic view on, the rangatahi will be right. They'll do it well. And that's, I think, just like that, like social media, like podcasts, like blogs in previous years. Like I think generative AI does kind of break down the barriers, like decentralizes knowledge a bit more. And I think like getting your voice out there is even easier now because of that, and I think just in general it's a good thing because it's generally in favour of voices that were previously marginalised. So just to offer a little ray of hope, I kind of think that the opportunity to tell our own stories is improved a little bit by if used in the right way. But I think that same kind of thought is a little bit of a double-edged sword, because I think that, Daniel, you asked earlier of what are the global threats, I think, and I don't think this is a new idea, but just that same technology just allows for the mass importing of kind of dangerously divisive media and political rhetoric, and I think we're kind of starting to see it in the last few years. And it's just exacerbated by how easily information is distributed and created. So yeah, I guess I started trying to be positive, but that was actually
But it's a good point, a very good point.
Kaye-Maree asked a really good question, I thought, which is, what are the Indigenous innovative JVs of the future? What would that look like? And if we assume that there's the capacity for Indigenous peoples to start to value and measure their values, what common ground might we find in terms of how we work together, whether it be in te reo, whether it be for the taiao, or whatever. So I think there's a certain range of highly possible areas that we would absolutely venture into because of our common ground and our shared values. The interesting challenge that we might have, were we to say yes, this is part of the pathway forward, is to create scale, so that we can not go down the path. And that was another good example about, iwi having to reinvent the wheel on some of these things, and it gets all too hard, especially in this space. And oh no, it's too much. And so that takes me to a thought around, is it, and this is maybe my question to the panel, all of you, is it possible for the types of JV opportunities, whether it be intra-iwi or intra-Indigenous, to be able to come together and pretty much we'll say, taiao stuff, we're doing it. And have you seen, in the spaces that you've been involved in, have you seen that kind of real concentration of effort in the utilisation of tech, data, AI, and the way in which we're collaborating together?
I've certainly seen people articulate their intention, and I think the ability of Indigenous people to cooperate, not just to collaborate, but to cooperate, is quite profound. When we think about the impact that the Kohanga Reo movement had on Indigenous language throughout the world, that global impact is an example that will inspire generations of Māori people and Indigenous people. And I want to take this moment to reflect on the passing of Auntie Iritana, because that kuia, she imbued those of us that were part of that first cohort of Kohanga Reo children with understanding that being Māori was more than just speaking the reo. It was about participating actively in our culture and ensuring the ongoing transmission of language and culture and playing a part in that. I want to mention that e hoa because I don't know if I said it earlier, but I don't know if you've heard of Rodriguez Lorette. He was saying every time an Indigenous language dies, it's like a library is burning down. And when we think about that library, that's a library of information. That's a library of data. I think collectively, as Indigenous people, we have an important opportunity to scale, not just in development, but also thinking about how we could have a network, perhaps, of Indigenous-owned mini data centres that are perhaps part of a network that not only contribute to advancing AI, but also contribute to advancing solutions for local problems, whether that's power in Mitimiti, whether that's electricity in Tikanga, whether that's what does that look like when we understand where the sunbelt is, Andrew, and our intimate knowledge of, okay, well, if you've got no water and there's a drought and you've got 100 cows, go and dig a hole down in Awanui. You only have to go 3 meters deep and hello, it fills up with water. Our knowledge of the ecosystems that our languages are related to provides us with an intimate knowledge of the landscape. And that's the sort of development, I think, that not only mirrors the intent of ensuring intergenerational transmission of language and culture, but it also provides a way to enable economic development. Because from my point of view, we have to prepare our people for the jobs of the future. We must prepare our people for the jobs of the future, and how do we enable and inspire our people to not only be the users of technology, but we can be the developers of it too.
Kia ora. A live example, I think there's lots of examples where we've cooperated powerfully as Māori and other First Nations peoples. Was recently, and my mete Amber here is in the room. We started to forge a relationship with the Pequot Nation. And they are They were the very first point of contact of colonisation in America. So colonised at least 200 years before they came to Aotearoa. So they had had a big, long journey of all the things, all the terrible things that could have happened. But in the 70s and 80s, they came back together as a tribe, reconstituted themselves, stood themselves up, and they're around 12 to 1,300 today. They have one of the largest casinos in the Northern Hemisphere, and a broad range of investments across technology, restaurants, food, luxury golf courses, all sorts. But when we met, the connection was culture. And they have also the largest Indigenous-owned museum in the world. And their interest was, how might we bring our, what they call their sky woman to life using technology, and what could that look like? So they brought in Maru Niho Niho, and she created a whole avatar of their sky woman. There was a whole stack of research and scanning and collaboration with their people, but very quick because they only had a short timeline. They invested over $150,000 for that prototype. And then what I thought was very special about that trade of Maru and her team's knowledge, she sent her crew over there to do the work, was that she also gifted the IP of Sky Woman to their people as part of that beginning of that hononga between our whānau. And we're lucky that we'll be bringing them over to Aotearoa very soon. But why I lean into this example is because you have a tribe that is that has huge capital reserves and also have their own mana motuhake and their own reservation space. So money for them is not an issue. But where they saw the potential for bringing together our knowledge, our expertise, was around knowledge, taonga, and also just the cool way that we do things, I think, as Māori, was very interesting for them. But also, and Arapata Rubens here from Ngaitahu, one of their tupuna came here in 1840 and married in with a Ngaitahu woman. He was a whaler. He connected with this wahine toa from down Karetane, and so there were all these Pequot Māori uri here in Aotearoa. But that's not a story on its own. There's actually lots of collaboration, intermarriage between us, and how do we lean into those relationships, which is really, you've got this, I've got this, how do we bring it together to benefit the growth and development of our whānau together. And I think that's an X factor that we bring as Māori entrepreneurs, researchers, innovators, is that the intention is not just the pūtea. The intention is, how do we both grow, heal, and develop as a result of this relationship together? I think that's pretty awesome.
Just going to check with Natalie somewhere. How are we doing time-wise? 2 minutes. 10, okay. Oh, because of our early start, okay.
I'd like to give a success story, an opportunity story, and a cautionary story. The success story is R, right? The statistical software co-started by Ross Ihaka, and they made it open source, they made it free, and it's now global. It is now the go-to software for a lot of things, especially genetics. Did Ross make any money out of it? No, he's still wearing the same hakari jandals he's been wearing forever. Still wearing the black rugby shorts, and actually he's usually bare feet, if there's anything. But that was about values, right? Because he believed knowledge needs to be everywhere, and access to knowledge needs to be everywhere. Our team's now developing a tool to put Tom up here has developed a tool to put a point and click interface on top of that, so you don't actually have to be a coder anymore. Small plug for the Insight software, which is also free. We have achieved international success in the data and technology space with global acceptance. We have a fantastic opportunity with Horizon Europe funding, so that's $97 billion they have to push out the door by the end of 2027. New Zealand has got access to that because of some very clever people managed to put a science treaty, staple a science treaty onto a free trade agreement. Kia ora. But that gives us access as if we were in Europe. We were the first country to get access in that way. And there's amazing interest in Europe in Indigenous issues. And yes, some of it's exploitative, but most of it's because the Horizon Europe Research Fund is to fund research-informed solutions that Europe deems to be important for Europe and the globe. So it's actually science diplomacy. And because it's global, they're looking for diverse solutions, and we offer the diversity, both the diversity and the solution, right, in terms of the context. We've had a remarkable success rate in that fund. And there's the work programs, the investment programs for that are just about to be announced shortly by the European Union. Incredible opportunity, especially now that Canada's in. So we've got interest from the Sami Sapmi people in Canada. United States won't be in there, unfortunately, but we can all, the Pacific people, our Pacific cousins, are also can use that pūtea as well. So there's a fantastic opportunity there. But one of the things that's happening is that it started by a bit of sort of Indigenous facadism, you know. We want a bit of an Indigenous facade on it. But there's an opportunity there for either Indigenous-led projects, probably led out of Europe, but at least Indigenous work streams, controlled work streams within entire projects. So that's the cautionary tale that goes with that opportunity. That, you know, a lot of Europe doesn't necessarily see how we get there in terms of producing this novel dividend that actually works. There's a lot of interest in the care principles globally, but when you start talking about how you get there in terms of governance, people start backing off. So what this means for me, and I'm saying this in so I'll have to take my official MB hat off because I'm about to say something probably not necessarily in line with some government positions, but what that means is when we're looking at those overseas collaborations, we have to be prepared to say no.
Absolutely.
Right? Just because they've got the capital, right? We have to be. We still need to be able to go in there as Māori, as Indigenous people, and say, "This is what works for us. This is how we're being prepared to work." And we can do that because we can demonstrate success. We're not a junior partner. We're the successful partner. Right? And so when we're looking at these opportunities, these international opportunities, we have to be cautious of not only the data harvesters, right, but the people who want to have the apparent value of things like the care principles without actually engaging with the processes like co-governance that make that happen. Where we will get traction and where we have got traction on the international funding scheme of things and the international funds is our demonstration of success. What I'm saying about Horizon Europe, it now provides that direct opportunity to engage with our Indigenous relations in the Pacific and Canada and Sami, and I think we should go absolutely really hard on it. So if you haven't looked at the Horizon Europe website yet, please do so. If you want to have a chat to me about it afterwards, I'll be around. But I think that's an international opportunity in a really, really supportive environment. And the success rate is higher than any research fund here in Aotearoa. So we plug, but I think there's a big opportunity there for doing what we're good at internationally.
I just want to pick up on that because I think that draws our attention to a unique ability of our haukainga, our whānau hapu and our iwi to actually measure precision and accuracy when autonomous algorithms are performing tasks. Nowadays, we're hearing about agents. Agents aren't new to us. Whether that agent is the kai kōrero, he's got a task to perform. It is to mihi to the manuhiri. Oh, we sit down and we analyse that mihi. Hey, our attention to detail is second to none. Now, when I think about our ability to provide that type of analysis to data and the way that we consider the performance of an agent, it's important for us to recognise that we have something special to contribute to the world. And our ability to provide access to that information is not only an opportunity to identify risk, it's an opportunity to grow. And I think our ability to seek out ways for our whānau to grow ideas is not just important now, it's going to be important into the future. But for us to be able to see past data sovereignty, we must maintain it. We must maintain our data sovereignty, because without that gold, there really isn't a heck of a lot of opportunity to carve out a special way for us to create new jobs for our whānau hapu and iwi. If we're not caring for our people, who is? And I think we've all got a special place to contribute to that. I want to acknowledge Nanaia because the Kahau Fund gave us a chance at Te Hiku. Everyone laughed at us when we said we were going to teach computers how to speak Māori. But Kahau gave us a go, and we blew it out of the water. Why? Because we had the support of our kuia and kaumātua, a native language speaking community. And when we think about our whānau hapu and iwi, we have a very special contribution to make to the world. And our examples of being able to lead, not always from the front, sometimes from the back, are based on principles. And those principles and values that Nanaia, Andrew, Kaye, a koe rā hoki a hākua kei te o āporo nui. When we think about it, those are the things that guide us in our decision making. And I think it's not so much the decision that we make, it's how we make it too. That is an important contribution that we can offer to the world. But in that, we still have to carve out a way to make sure our people have jobs.
Just riffing off that, I think when AI was starting to take a foothold, I was nervous. I don't know if anyone else kind of had this conversation around Terminator 2, that's the possible outcome of all this technology, and that our world will get overrun with robots and then everything's over. And I was lucky to be supported by the University of Waikato to attend a New Ideas conference in Arizona. And I had this nervousness in my puku around AI. We're not designing it, we weren't then actively. The systems were being designed offshore. There were just so many worries and concerns. But I was very grateful to meet a gentleman called Jason, who proposed an idea. What if we saw AI as our kin, as our whanaunga? How would that reshape our relationship with this technology? And that kind of opened up a whole level of multi-layered thinking in my brain. I was like, thanks, bro, that was awesome. But it was also there where I heard about this other research program called Abundant Intelligences, of which Peter Lucas and others are part of, which is around centering Indigenous values, thoughts in the design of the future of what AI will look like or could look like. That also means that we need jobs for the future, engineers, AI engineers that are actually going to be proactively designing the AI of the future. And I think that that's a very considerable research program, extraordinarily influential for our people, and giving us a doorway into participating, again, not just as the end user, but as the developers in this space. So do you want to add anything to
Well,
that?
artificial intelligence is being used now by mining companies to work out where best to approach next. That's just the reality. I mean, when we think about what other speakers today talked about, you can have a big fight in the whānau home because someone put a photo of the baby on Facebook. We can take on board that, many of our whānau have been described, and I'm talking about our younger whānau, have been described as digital natives. Have you heard that term, digital natives? Well, there's another term, digital captivity. And digital captivity, of course, is a term that we don't hear a lot about because everyone's talking about the digital natives. And what we do, of course, is we contribute our data to corporations. And when we think about how we're contributing that every day, each of us spend on average 6 hours a day online, contributing our data. And when people are in captivity, they have never known freedom. Different for us. We all came from a time before the device. Hey? But there are many of our whānau that don't know what captivity is. And what I have to say is when we think about this mahi, set the captives free. Set the captives free. Because when we are set free, we also are given an opportunity to see through different eyes. And I say that with purpose. And I'm not saying reject all digital experiences, but let's be aware. Let's be aware that there is such a term called digital slavery. And our governments have a responsibility to acknowledge that data, your personal data, is a human right. And you, in fact, have a right to know how it's being used, how it's being accessed. Is your health data stored in New Zealand? Whose rules and regulations is that data subject to? How is that data then being used to inform the development of models that belong, let's use that word belong, and owned by corporations that can use that information how they please? Now, I'm not saying that we should not be part of important advances in the work of artificial intelligence, but if there's no consideration to the regulations, or at least principles, that should guide AI for good, because AI development isn't always for good. Kia ora tātou.
Could I want to just add a real opportunity. And that opportunity is sometimes called the demographic dividend. But basically what it means is half of our population's under the age of 25. That's 500,000 people. If we're going to build the future, make them, and create the workforce for the jobs of the future, what are we doing? What are we doing for that? We have models for that. We have Tikanga and Taina. So I want to put a challenge to you, as the older generation, and some of us are older, even older than the older generation. It's our job to make the most of that opportunity. Right? We can't rely on the Crown because we already know that we're talking about STEM subjects in schools. Guess who's not getting the science graduate teachers teaching them science in high schools? It's our kids. We can't rely on the Crown, right?
They'll get the AI teacher.
They'll get the AI teacher, if any teacher at all. It is up to us who are working in the sector to make sure that we're producing the next generation. So look around you, right? Look at our average age. We're the rangatahi. We need to be bringing them with us. Tuakana, Taina, we need to be responsible for making sure that those 500,000 people are the workforce of the future, are defending our sovereignty, are protecting our rights, and are creating the information that will lead to Māori advancement and our global leadership roles. We're not doing that at the moment, right? Because we're relying on the Crown to do it. I'm going to put a challenge out to you then, that word is, it is up to us. And think in your next 2 years, because this job is urgent, we need to be producing at least 5 to 10 people each who could do our jobs. Right? Because without it, we're going to get left behind. But we could do it because we have that 500,000 people who are going to be could be the next generation of leaders, but it's going to be us to make sure that they get there.
Kia ora.
And it's not a question that can't be answered, it's what can we do in our home today. And we've spoken about it. We value ancestral wisdom. We ensure that there is a common sense of unity which is in our communities and resides there and is grown from there. We value civil society and our need to participate in it, and we foster curious, critical thinkers. And we can do that now. We don't need 2 years. We just have to say this is the priority. And whatever we do at home every day in the small ways, I think, is building that kind of a future.
Kia ora.
Yeah, wow. I mean, it's awesome to hear the discussion and the riffing. I could stay here for quite a long time, but I think we're out of time. Just Hautahi, you've been in the background here, just as you've been listening. Do you have like a quick final thought that you would like to add before we wrap?
No, I just think the widow that Andrew and Nanaia put out is probably a good place to end, to think of going forward.
I've got one last thing to share.
One last thing from Kaye-Maree.
So just a shameless plug, tātou mā. The other great thing is that we're launching a new podcast. It's called Mea Nei Te Kōrero, and it's all about Indigenous innovation. So we've got 5 cool interviews. Pig Lucas will be on that list, probably this whole panel, of innovators to talk about how might we share ideas into the world to make the world a much better place. Our first kind of set of yarns are around genomics and what that looks like. That's a whole aisle in itself. But I'm really interested to talk to you as Kairangahau, where you might be interested in sharing your mātauranga to new audiences. So the team have got, I think, a QR code, and then hopefully we'll be able to put that same podcast channel up through Whare Kōrero so that we can again reach our whānau with great thinkers and innovators, because we are magnificent, more magnificent than sometimes you might give yourself credit for. And this is our time, really, to share our knowledge, our expertise, and make more stuff that's going to make the world better.
I want to say thank you to everybody for the opportunity to come from Kaitaia, because this kōrero, tikanga in technology, such a powerful statement. And whoever is responsible for that whakaaro nui, I just want to say thank you, because it reminds us of where we come from. Kia ora tātou.
Kia ora,
Kia ora.